Buddhism isn't just about meditation, and if that's your first association, you're not alone. But there are 2,000 years worth of knowledge that continues to transform people's lives today. So I'll be sharing the 3 central mindsets or characteristics underlying all Buddhist teachings that radically help me move from a life filled with extreme ups and downs to one filled with ease, clarity, and peace. The 3 quote-unquote mindsets is called the 3 marks of existence, consisting of impermanence or anicca, suffering or dukkha, and not self or anatta. Different schools of Buddhism have various interpretations and practices surrounding these 3 truths, but I'll be explaining them in the easiest way possible and how they changed my life in a secular environment, and maybe for you too. The first existence is impermanence or anicca, which teaches that everything is always in a state of flux and nothing ever stays the same. This may seem obvious, but we often don't grasp the depth of this knowledge and perceive our life setup, those around us, and even our perception of ourselves to be more or less the same until some big event thrusts our life into one big motion and challenges our false sense of security and stability. So for example, we may view our 9-to-5 jobs as stable even though we know our employment is at will, meaning we can really get fired at any time, but choose to believe it's stable until the company starts doing layoffs or a looming recession challenges our assumptions that our job was stable in the first place. It's like looking at a lake thinking it's still and a graspable object, but trying to hold onto the water only to realize it's an impossible task. Essentially, our brains like to construct the worldview as stable to amplify our sense of control in predicting the future and minimizing uncertainty. It's a useful coping mechanism until it really isn't. The permanence mindset is what causes us the greatest pains when, for example, something doesn't go the way we want to, or someone doesn't act the way we want to, and the distress stems from us not accepting that things, circumstances, and people change all the time, and that we really can't control everything in life. And this is also how this shifted mindset helped me live a happier life. Recognizing all things, all beings as impermanent helped me accept reality and let go faster. When I started seeing all things and people in our lives as just passing moments that come and go, life became lighter. I noticed how I was actually projecting a lot of preconceived notions on things and people and holding them onto some expectation that ultimately caused me to be unhappy when they violated those expectations. So for example, I love getting the classic burger with a gluten-free bun at Veggie Grill because of my wheat allergy and can always count on them for having that combo for me at any given moment, especially because they're a chain. And out of the blue one day they didn't, and instead I had to go with the lettuce wrap. Before I really understand impermanence deeply, I would have been upset about that dining experience all day because my expectation of the gluten-free bun wasn't met, and came up with the 10,000 scenarios of how they could have been better to make my allergy-friendly bun work. But in that instance, I recognized that the lettuce wrap was a reality, felt a little sad about it, and decided to move on and enjoy it to the fullest extent either way. Stupid example, but we often hold on to such fixed images of situations and people out of our own comfort that we don't realize life is change, and part of that means embracing it at any given moment, and as a result nothing comes as a surprise or disappointment. We often stay stuck in sadness, anger, shame, or whatever negative emotion you want to name because we ultimately don't believe that things will change and stay fixated on the emotions, confusing that as our safety net for stability. When I fully shifted my mindset to realizing the impermanence, I no longer held on to grudges, resentments, and even my fears of the future that blocked me from being present for my life's joys. Understanding impermanence not only allowed me to let go faster, but also helped me grow faster. Or if you're into that productivity stuff, the growth mindset. Part of being human means we like to lock ourselves to fixed identities, so 1, we don't need to question our ethos, and 2, external threats don't throw us into an existential crisis. But that comes at a cost. Fixed identities based off image, personalities, and morals also fix our growth to a very set and linear path with no alternative possibilities. So say you think of yourself as a very logical person because growing up everyone has told you so, and perhaps because you work a very logic-heavy job like engineering. By locking yourself down to that logical label, anything that doesn't support the growth of logic is easily dismissed because it doesn't affirm yourself and actually threatens you. So you may end up missing out on the creative arts, dissociate from your emotions, or struggle with building genuine friendships because the logical label doesn't allow you to grow beyond that mindset. But understanding impermanence for me meant understanding that although I may have reactive tendencies due to how I was conditioned, that I really ultimately have no duty to how I view myself the present day. So for example, I used to joke that the only words I read are the captions on Instagram or the designer credits in Vogue, but after I realized how impermanent my fashion persona was, I went from reading virtually nothing besides endless self and brand promotions to almost 1 book a week last year. So impermanence is not only what underlies the growth mindset, but also allows you to literally be anything or anyone who experiences any emotions you want on a profound level. If you deeply understand that you already are an embodiment of change, and only you can decide to accelerate that. The second mark of existence or mindset is suffering or dukkha, and is part of Buddhism's noble truth that life is suffering. This one's an important one. It's really not pessimistic because all it's teaching is that life can never satisfy you the way that you think it can, because as we just talked about, all things are impermanent. So that nice dinner, new purchase, or new promotions are all fleeting in terms of happiness, and for us to continually chase our desires for those short-lived happiness while avoiding our pains and sorrows only traps us into a cycle of never-ending satisfaction, or in Buddhist terms, suffering. Fortunately, the fix for suffering is possible, and that's to detach from our desire to chase happiness and tendency to avoid our pains. So we walk that middle path of not being thrust into high highs and low lows and never feel at peace. The ultimate form of freedom and liberation, if you will. I do want to clarify here that in a secular context, that doesn't mean that all desires or pursuits of happiness is bad, but that our fixation, or in Buddhist terms, our attachments to things that we think will bring us happiness causes us to be stubborn, and we get anxious or sad when we don't get them. So instead, we need to lessen that reliance on chasing our ideas of happiness and avoiding pain to find that middle ground that allows us to access happiness regardless of outcomes and life circumstances. And that's exactly how it helped me become happier regardless of where I am in life. Recognizing that the mindset of chasing happiness is actually part of the problem. In a toxic positive culture where even mainstream psychology often talks about reframing your mindsets to be just more positive, actually fuels that addiction of chasing happiness that will ultimately never satisfy. And that is because we have made happiness to be a set of conditions of if-then statements that makes anything outside of those conditions transitory states that makes life hard to enjoy. But the life of suffering reminds us that, ironically, detaching our reliance on needing to chase the happiness actually brings us more joy, and learning to address our own pains plays a big part of the equation as well. Conditional happiness ultimately undermines the importance of working with our difficult emotions or relationships because we assign that painful meaning to them and therefore are not able to find the unconditional happiness that lays underneath. So we end up becoming workaholics, shopaholics, alcoholics, or whatever holic you want to name because we're actively avoiding addressing our fears and insecurities only in favor of the temporary dopamine hit, the ego inflation, or unhinged party high, and approach death never having arrived at the true destination. So the life is suffering mindset helped me be more present, to pay attention to my desires and my avoidances so I can take a balanced approach and recognize that only I, at the end of the day, am able to experience that unconditional happiness and freedom to be at peace by mindfully detaching. And that as long as I own up to that responsibility, happiness is always abundant. When I realized that chasing happiness is actually part of the problem, the life is suffering teaching also helped me realize that how we feel about our life are just our interpretation, and that's it. It might feel the opposite in real life, but actually no one is telling us to do this or do that. All our actions are driven by our own choices to chase desires and flee pain. We might not be able to choose where and what families we're born into and what happens to us during childhood, but as we grow into adults, how we choose to assign the labels of desirable or painful and whether we become dictated by them is actually our responsibility. Essentially, I learned that I'm the only agent in my life to shift my mindset and reclaim that sovereignty, and that any suffering I experience comes from the non-satisfactory quality of endless chasing. So a while back when I was working at a different company, I lost out on a few promotion opportunities and saw all my peers getting ahead of me. I obviously felt very frustrated and angry because my performance has been consistently strong, so I held that resentment towards my company for months, not realizing that I had to play in that anger's complacency. It wasn't until I acknowledged my anger to its full extent, recognized how I was feeling treated unfairly, that I initiated difficult conversations with management and leadership to advocate for myself and simultaneously manage my expectations that a promotion by default did not mean happiness. I did eventually get the promotion I wanted, but it wasn't until later on that I understood I actively suppressed my anger's call to action and was stuck in a prolonged discontent phase because of my strong desire for wanting that promotion. This may be a blunt realization for some, but ultimately is one of the most important lessons in life, so you don't throw your own happiness and sorrows down the drain, not recognizing it's your own doing. You are the only person that has to live with yourself for the rest of your life. Don't leave that fate to your own addictions of your desires while fleeing pain, not conscious that it's actually up to you to shift your mindset about how you interpret life. The final mark of existence of not self, or anatta, or sometimes translated as non-self, takes the mindset of impermanence and applies it to ourselves, where we are really just a stream of sensations, thoughts, and emotions and experiences glued together by our concept of self. Essentially, our idea of self is just an illusion and blocking us from enlightenment and accessing that unconditional peace and happiness. I won't make this more confusing than it needs to be because this one is particularly hard to grasp with if you've never dabbled dabbled in any spiritual practices before, but the simplest way I can describe it as is when you forget that you exist. Perhaps you look in the eyes of a lover and feel a bond that is way beyond you, or you're in nature and you're awe and nature's presence dissolves your borders between your human self and nature. It's those kind of defining moments that bring out our true nature of not self and highlights our individualistic concepts are all constructs to keep us comfortable in a divisive society and prevents us from going down an existential path. It is a mindset that is pretty much the epitome of most spiritual teachings beyond just Buddhism, and I'll explain why it's so life-changing. When I shifted to the not-self concept, I learned to connect with others better. We often go about our lives with such strong conceived notion of ourselves that we don't even realize we carry an unconscious division of you versus me. And so we say things like we're so different, or they suck, we're better, and use those as excuses for when we get lonely or feel isolated. But understanding that the self is just my own construct or even my own fantasies helped me see past the differences and understand that everyone on this earth, no matter how good or evil, are subject to the same conditions of suffering and impermanence. And with that, no conversation is impossible even with someone who I initially might feel like they're worlds apart from me. Realizing the not-self mindset is what helped me understand that we can unravel each person's layers like an onion to get to that core root of universal human nature. I have always been a shy kid and flushed like a tomato whenever I spoke with anyone, but not-self helped me move from practically not being able to speak with anyone to being able to find my core group of friends to being able to speak with anyone without feeling embarrassed or shy. As long as you're willing to put down your fragile self, no passing connection in this life is impossible. So you can interpret that as you like, but that may be connections, friends, lovers, communities, you name it. The not-self mindset will allow you to participate in more meaningful connections and alleviate your sense of separation, which is the root cause of all loneliness. Not everyone will ultimately be for you, but will conversations become easier, perhaps deep AF, and that much less awkward? You bet they will. Beyond friendships and relationships, realizing the not-self also radically healed my relationship with myself. I am no longer dictated by my thoughts and emotions because I understand them as just passing experiences that are ultimately not me. When we think of ourselves as a set entity fixed with thoughts and emotions, we identify with them and make a persona out of them, and hence life becomes one big cycle of repeat behaviors and patterns that make us unhappy until we're in the deathbed. The not-self mindset helps me examine my past, my traumas, and present-day struggles with a more neutral lens and allows me to work through my issues more constructively. In short, I no longer have to play both the observer and the judge while examining issues that are making me unhappy. I'm not judging myself for feeling sad or angry, and instead let myself sit with the emotions so I can process them and not confuse emotions as me and that they dictate my actions. For example, part of psychodynamic therapy is understanding how your childhood experiences lead to your emotional sufferings. By knowing the not-self Buddhist principle, I'm able to better dig up the quote-unquote unconscious memories to process them and move past my traumas that sometimes takes people decades to heal from. The knee-jerk emotional responses may still be there, but the not-self mindset helped me move past my self-limiting beliefs and rewired me to become a more consistently happy and peaceful person. And that might as well be you too. I hope you've enjoyed this video applying Buddhist teachings to help you in your day-to-day life. Don't forget to like and subscribe and share with a friend if you found this video helpful. And until then, you got this. Till next time.